To the average eye, this might just be a stone like any other. But take a closer look. Amidst the dark, cloud-filled sky, this stone actually allows you to see the dazzling sun clearly cutting through the clouds. You might not have witnessed the magic of this sunstone before, but the Vikings of Europe, more than 1,000 years ago, used this very sunstone for navigation, dominating the seas. Known as Norse pirates, the Vikings were naturally fierce and belligerent, raiding and plundering far and wide, becoming the demons of European folklore. When a group of people becomes famous enough, an era is named after them, and the period from the 8th to the 11th century was known as the famed Viking Age in European history. Speaking of Vikings, there's a legend of a man you must know about. He is the renowned Viking leader, Ragnar Lothbrok. Starting today, I will bring to you the classic American TV series Viking Season, taking you through the legendary life of Ragnar. Ragnar lives in a Viking tribe in Denmark, with a happy and fulfilling family life. He has a beautiful wife and a pair of smart and well-behaved children. Although he was a farmer and not wealthy, owning his own land was considered well-off compared to most Vikings. However, Ragnar wasn't content with a stable life, for he had the blood of a warrior coursing through his veins. The next day, a village meeting called by the tribe's chief was scheduled, and Ragnar wanted to take his son, Bjorn, who had just turned 12, with him. However, his wife, Lagertha, thought Bjorn was still too young. Ragnar disagreed, believing that as a man, Bjorn should go out and see more of the world. Reluctantly, his wife agreed. On their way, Bjorn asked what the village meeting was all about. Ragnar explained that the assembly mainly dealt with some criminal matters and then discussed where to raid after the weather warmed up. The Danes lived in an area with scarce farmland and long winters, meaning resources were extremely limited. This meant they had to raid neighboring countries to survive. Since all the ships were controlled by the Lord, it was up to the Lord to decide where to raid. Following tradition, the Lord would surely send them to the eastern regions of Russia, but Ragnar was more inclined to head to the countries in the west, lured by legends of breathtaking landscapes and lands flush with gold. After a day and night's journey, the father and son finally arrived at the coastal town where the Lord resided. Ragnar first visited his own brother Rollo, a man who was also fascinated by the Western world. The problem was, their ancestors had never reached the West. It was merely a legend that there was gold everywhere. Moreover, without landmarks, they would surely get lost in the vast ocean.
I believe there's a way to go west. I have something that will change everything.
Ragnar took out a disc from his parcel. He said it was given to him by a vagabond and called it a sundial. He asked Rollo to pour water on it, and despite Rollo's reluctance and skepticism, he did as instructed.
Now, this candle is the sun. Every day, the sun rises up into the sky until noon. See how the shadow shortens? At noon, it is at its shortest.
That only tells me how far south I have traveled.
Didn't I just tell you to listen? The next day at sea, you place a board back into the water around noon and watch your shadow. If the shadow only touches a circle.
Your course remains true?
Yes. And if it passes outside the circle like this?
Then you have drifted. And you must steer further south.
Hearing this, Rollo finally realized the magic of this device, but he also raised a question. If there was a storm and no sun, wouldn't the sundial be useless? Ragnar had anticipated this reaction, so he calmly pulled out another treasure and led Rollo outside. In the dark cloudy sky, this thing could actually pass through the black clouds and clearly see the dazzling sun. What you may not know is that even modern scientists today are astounded by the magic of this stone. The assembly convened as scheduled, and amidst the cheers of the crowd, Lord Earl finally made his appearance. In the Vikings, the tribal lords represent the law and have the power of life and death. But of course there's always the formality of a so-called popular vote. The main agenda of this assembly was to punish two criminals, one a thief, the other a murderer. The thief would be treated like a rat crossing the street, subjected to the crowd's bricks and spit. If he survived the ordeal, he'd be left with barely half his life, while the murderer would be beheaded, his head fed to pigs, with the Lord cursing his soul never to enter Valhalla. This was the most vicious curse among Vikings, who believed in the pantheon led by Odin, where they thought souls would dine and celebrate with the gods in Valhalla after death. Thus, for Vikings, this curse was infinitely more malevolent than the common curse of never achieving peace after death. After the punishments, the Lord would place an arm ring on boys who had turned 12, signifying a lifetime of loyalty to him. In fact, This had been the tradition for generations among Vikings, a key reason for their unity. After the ceremony, Ragnar inappropriately asked Earl where they would raid this summer. Ragnar knew the answer but asked anyway, aware that Earl wouldn't change their raiding location but still brought it up. He argued that Eastern Russia was too poor, and raiding the same places every year wasn't as profitable anymore, suggesting there might be better options, but Earl said in a firm voice,
Oh, yes. Choice, yes. I've heard of these rumors, these stories, that if we travel west, that we will somehow reach a land that is rich and plentiful. They're my ships. I pay for them, and they go where I tell them to go. Now that's the end of the matter.
With Earl's words at that point, Ragnar wisely chose not to say more. Later, Earl pulled Ragnar aside to warn him that if he dared to publicly question his authority again, he would take Ragnar's land and make him pay dearly for his unrealistic dreams. Before leaving, Earl noticed Ragnar's unwilling look and, knowing he wouldn't let it go, ordered his man Olafur to keep a close eye on him. As expected, after the assembly, Ragnar took his son to the mountains to find his friend Floki. Floki, exceptionally talented and obsessed with shipbuilding, could tell which part of a tree was suitable for building ships just by looking at the trunk, but Earl's control over private boat building is very strict, so he has never built a boat. But Ragnar had immense faith in Floki, so he took out all his savings to help Floki fulfill his dream, which, of course, was also to realize his own dream of venturing to the Western world. Soon after, the dragon-headed ship that Floki built was finally completed. Ragnar was thrilled to see such a magnificent creation, while Floki was nervously excited.
Set the sail. Look! The sail! She'll sink. No, she bloody won't.
Don't pretend to build such a boat. It's beyond my humble capabilities.
I'll set the sail.
I'm sorry, Ragnar.
When they set sail, Floki couldn't contain his excitement any longer.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Why didn't you believe me? I told you I could do it!
Now it's all up to you, Ragnar Lothbrok.
However, they didn't notice Earl's man secretly watching them from the shore. While Ragnar was away, two thugs broke into Lagertha's home with malicious intentions, but Lagertha, calm and composed, coolly inquired about their intentions.
If you're hungry, I will feed you. If you're thirsty, I will give you a drink. Otherwise, you must go.
We will eat and drink after we've satisfied our other needs.
With a wicked smile, she signaled that if they were brave enough to enter, they should come in. Then she swiftly turned to grab a red-hot poker from the stove. What the thugs didn't know was that they were not dealing with an ordinary woman. Before marriage, Lagertha was the most renowned female warrior among the Vikings, and in time, she would become a figure that struck terror across all of Europe. When evening arrived, Ragnar and his son finally returned home, with Ragnar's brother Rollo also coming over to their place. During dinner, Rollo started sharing Lagertha's heroic tales with Gyda.
Your mother was a famous shield maiden.
Was?
Is a famous shield maiden. Fought in the same shield ball against the Eastlanders. She fought like a Valkyrie.
The look in Rollo's eyes shows that he has something in mind for Lagertha. After dinner, Rollo and Ragnar discussed the matter of raiding the Western kingdoms. Now that they had a ship, they lacked enough men. Clearly, just the two of them wouldn't suffice. Moreover, in a tribe like the Vikings, where loyalty was paramount, not many would dare to defy the Lord's wishes and join them on their adventure. In fact, some might even betray them by reporting to the Lord. But Ragnar wasn't worried at all, as if he had already figured out a solution for their manpower issue. However, as Ragnar stepped outside to relieve himself, Rollo sneaked into Lagertha's room.
Yesterday I was with a girl from the town.
Thank you.
Good-looking girl, too. So yours.
Don't talk like that.
Why not? I think about you all the time.
I would never insult you. You're too great a warrior. But perhaps not so great a man.
On the other side, Olafur informed the Lord about the brothers' plan to set sail secretly. Unexpectedly, the Earl chose not to act but to wait and see.
Only good things come from watching and waiting.
During their conversation, Earl noticed Olafur staring intently at his wife. Earl watched and then he calmly got up and said to Olafur,
Were you looking at my wife?
I did.
Have you slept with her?
No, Lord. I swear. On all the gods.
If she wants to sleep with you, then I give my permission. It will all be arranged.
That night, when Olafur returned home, he found a woman lying in his bed, who turned out to be Earl's wife, Siggy. Thinking it was Earl's reward, Olafur hurriedly climbed into bed.
Do you really suppose that a worm like you could sleep with a woman like me? I'm an Earl's wife.
Knew not to trust. Take it.
Yes, Lord.
One has to admire Earl's cunning, using his wife to test his subordinates' loyalty. Meanwhile, with the help of a longtime friend, Ragnar secretly gathered more than 20 young men to join their crew and swore them to secrecy about their plans to sail west. He also promised them equal shares of the spoils of their raids.
But Earl Haraldsson has ordered us to sail east.
The Earl knows nothing about our new boat. This is why he refuses to let us go west.
He could kill us for disobeying his orders.
Yes, he could. We can offer you a chance to shine in battle and impress the gods, and to bring back such plunder that you have never seen before.
I'll go.
Under Ragnar's persuasion, many joined his expedition team, deciding to set sail punctually in a few weeks. However, this decision deeply displeased Lagertha. This could be the most thrilling voyage of their lives, and Lagertha wanted to accompany her husband, but Ragnar refused her. This was to be the most dangerous journey with an uncertain future, and Ragnar wouldn't risk having his wife join him. Moreover, with 2 children to care for at home, if something happened to them, what would become of the children? During bedtime, an upset Lagertha demonstrated what true domestic strife was.
My love.
Never mind that. Defend yourself. How dare you? Am I not good enough for you? Am I not strong enough for you? Listen.
How could I forget?
Thankfully, Bjorn intervened just in time, preventing the argument from turning fatal. Knowing her husband was determined not to let her join, Lagertha had no choice but to reluctantly give up. A few weeks later, the crew was ready, setting off towards the unknown Western world. Thus began a Viking era that would loom over the hearts of Europeans for the next 300 years.